Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to a surprise pop-up Prasada Talks. Are you breathing? And what is breathwork anyway? I am, in case we haven't met yet, I'm Meg Townsend. I'm Director of Program Development and Whole Being Guide here with Prasada and breather and lover of breathing. Who are you who's joining me today? Nice to see your face. Tell us a little bit about you too.
Welcome, welcome. I'm Alice Dommert. I am the founder and CEO of Prasada, and it feels like every time we do a program, I say this is my favorite topic, but really, truly, breathwork is my favorite topic.
Yes, this is. I would say like breathwork and maybe nature is like your close second. It is hard because all of these are your favorite topics.
I know, I know. You can see I have a few books. I have an entire full segment. You can't see the breathwork books, but there is a whole, I think there are actually two shelves that are all about breathwork. So one definitely, I love talking about this.
Hooray. So thank you all for joining us today, whether you're here live with us in the Zoom room or you're watching on Facebook or you're perchance watching the recording after the fact. Alice and I wanted to hop on and talk a bit more about this thing called breathwork. We're seeing it. It's, as you predicted, Alice, a few years ago, breathwork was going to. Alice is really good at predicting rising trends. And she was like, breathwork is going to be big. And we're starting to see it really just flower and bloom and being offered in so many ways, shapes, and forms, which is really exciting. And so we want to talk to you a little bit about the power of breath work, how it changes lives, how it's changed our lives, how it's shaped our practice and our lives and really improved our whole being. And then at the end, we'll start to talk a little more about why we're very committed to this year and moving forward to designing breathwork experiences and in-person journeys and events for our Prasada community, and how you might become a part of those in some way, shape, or form. And if you're joining us live and you're here in the Zoom room, you do have the ability to ask questions. Let me just make sure that's turned on. It is now. So feel free to pop questions in the chat as we move through this, if anything comes up for you that you'd like us to address. So Alice, I guess, where should we start? Do you want to just start with your journey in breathwork? Because that's really why we're here and talking about it, is because you have found it such a useful practice and tool in everything that you do. So I'd love for you to share more about just how you started and what that journey's been like for you.
Yeah, so I was the kid who was always shaking my leg, like that little bouncy leg thing. I had a lot of energy as a kid. And, in a lot of our programs, we talk about not having enough energy, but there's also this super busy mind that we get that just is churning and churning and churning all the time. I was not a person that did yoga. I didn't really discover yoga until probably well after college. And really, my first experience of breath work was just in ocean breathing. And I think that it probably the first 2 years that I did yoga, I was just trying to figure out like where your body parts go and kind of didn't get the whole breathing thing. Like, oh. And so I think that happens for a lot of beginner students in yoga. And this idea that the thing that makes yoga a unique form of exercise and movement is that it's matched with the breath. And so this idea that we actually can control our breath and that our breath is actually directly connected to our nervous system. Once I started to recognize, like, why is it you feel so good at the very, very end of yoga? Why is it that you're in Shavasana and you're lying there going, wow, how could I have been so stressed out? And now I feel so calm. So that curiosity, I dabbled a little bit in Kundalini yoga, and they do a lot more of yoga breath work. And sort of to fast forward, I went through a period of a lot of changes in my life, and I had been practicing yoga, and I've been doing some breath work. That was when I really discovered rebirthing breath work and holotropic breath work. So I really have what I consider two sort of major practices of breath work. There's the day-to-day practice, and the way that I do that is I have a chanting. If anybody is on Yoga Glow, there is a 20-minute, it's called Balance Your Brain. It's with Kia Miller from Yoga Glow. And it is a 20-minute chant. And when we think of chanting, it's basically just singing. And when we're singing, we're taking inhales and we're taking long exhales, because when you sing and you make a tone, it has to last for a really long time. And we know from all the science that long exhales calm the nervous system and literally balance the brain. And so I'm also a bit of a skeptic. I go through periods where I'm like, I'm doing this practice, but is it really working? And I've gone through several years where I would do, 2 months of chanting in the morning before I would head off to CrossFit. And then a couple of months where I'd just try meditation. And a couple of months I'd try some just basic yoga. And time again, I have found that the chanting gets my nervous system balanced first thing in the morning. And then that really sets me up for what in the I Ching they call it the inner independence. I call it sort of that emotional stability, that you're not going to be reactive during the day. So that's really a practice that I have on the retreats that we did last year. I brought that practice. We sat on the dock and just follow along with Kia as we saw the bright sun on the water. And it's just really become a really important part of my daily routine in the morning. What I'll tell about the other one in a minute, but what kind of breathwork practice you have is similar, and these are more what we would consider the yogic breathwork practices.
Yes, because when you introduced what we'll talk about next, the like longer breathwork experiences, I was like, oh, I have no experience doing breathwork. And then as I kind of zoomed out and looked at, I'm a trained classical singer and actor and have, pursued that most of my life. So I've always been training in breath work in some way, shape, or form, and have built, a great lung capacity, if you will. But then it wasn't really until yoga that I learned really the effect of how we breathe and how it shapes our mind and our mood. And how
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the most efficient ways, as you talked about, like the body piece and the nervous system piece. But then on this mental level, it's really one of the fastest ways that we can shape our mental experience and how we're navigating the day. And I remember one of my very first yoga teachers, he said, if you want to change your mind, change your breath.
Mm-hmm.
Change how you're breathing, because that's going to directly inform what's going on in your mind. It also reflects what's going on in our mind too. That's the interesting thing. Like if you've ever had any sort of anxiety attack or cried, right? There's very different breath patterns. So I got really fascinated in looking at like, what are these different breath patterns? And then how can I consciously work with my breath and utilize different tools? So with my yoga path, it was a lot of like breath retentions or steady breath, which for a while drove me insane, like just breathing like a 1-to-1 ratio and counting your breath in, counting your breath out as you're moving your body. I did that for about a year and like wanted to run out of the room every time because it was just too much. But then I realized my ticker tape mind, a sports thing that like moving, that was what my mind felt like, was just like all the time. And I noticed as I continued to practice that steady breath, a steady, smooth, even breath,
Mm-hmm.
it was unbelievable. That's why I still do it, because it was unbelievable how it steadied my mind. So that was kind of some of my initial phases, was just through, my career training and then my second career training of yoga, that I really started to notice there's something to this and I like it. And I'm going to keep practicing. And then when you introduced me to rebirthing and transpersonal breath and holotropic breath, that opened a whole deeper can of worms that I'm loving exploring. So tell us more about that, as we just allude to it right now.
Yeah, before we jump into that, I just want to say it's been so interesting. So there's a guy I've been following. Some of you might um, know him. His name's Brian Johnson, and he has a new app that's called Heroic. Really fantastic program. He had a philosopher's notes program for many, many years. He's a very cool guy. He's just read hundreds and hundreds of all the really sort of amazing books from the Stoics and all the ancient wisdom, he calls it. And it's really interesting because he started talking, and I've really started thinking more about, when we talk about wellness and wellness fundamentals, and he talks a lot about zest, this idea of zest. And it's interesting because when we talk about the strengths and we do strengths programs, zest is the one that the fewest people have. And what he's identified is that zest is really energy.
Mm.
And most of the time, we get our energy from the body's capacity to sort of have that chi. Sometimes they call it chi, but we know that the breath is the sign that we are alive. And so in his programs, he's really integrating this idea of a breath, a breath, a breath as a wellness fundamental, because we can't live out our purpose unless we have that energy. And the way to sort of calm and not waste energy, the other part of when you were talking about that practice of just paying attention to, like, I'm inhaling, I'm exhaling, I'm inhaling, I'm exhaling, we're honing our attention.
Mhm.
And that is a mindfulness practice. So not only are we getting the physiology benefits of the actual breath work, but we're also honing the mind, because at this point, we're just using the breath as the focus, but it helps us have the capacity to not get distracted by so many of the other external distractions and even internal distractions. So that's another one of the big benefits. Yeah, I was in it was a period of time shortly after I got divorced, and a friend said, I'm doing this rebirthing and you've got to come. And it was somebody I really trusted, and I said, yeah, sure. And in rebirthing breath work, it is more like yogic breath work, where there is a particular prescribed way that you breathe. So, you're breathing in and out through your mouth and nose in a particular pattern. And the idea is that you're basically just flooding your body with oxygen. And when we do that, it's taking our thinking mind kind of offline. It's a little bit like, there's a term for it. It's the neural network. I'm not going to get into the science of it, but it's basically the reason why when you're in a shower, you sometimes have good ideas, because you've taken that pressure off the gas of thinking, thinking, thinking. And when you pull it back, that's when some of the ideas and insights come. And so in rebirthing breathwork and holotropic breathwork, the idea is that we're using the breath to sort of really saturate ourselves, and that the mind, not the busy chatter monkey mind, the wiser part of our mind, wisdom is considered knowledge that we apply, is actually able to help guide us and help us have insight and recognition. And um, a lot of people talk about this idea of metabolizing things that are difficult or challenges. So rebirthing breathwork definitely has a prescribed way. In holotropic breathwork or transpersonal breathwork, basically that came about. uh, Stan and Christina Groff worked to develop a system, because they had been working and seeing a lot of really great success with people who had trauma, addictions in the early days of LSD. It was in Austria, came to the United States. Those all got classified to where they could not use those anymore. So he said, how can I create an experience that gives people a similar psychedelic experience without having, I relate psychedelic experiences to being like you get on a roller coaster and it's going somewhere and it's taking you there. The breath work, the instructions, you're lying on a mat. He when he studied all the different cultures, he looked at a lot of times drumming or music is used. So in a holotropic breathwork experience, there is a curated soundtrack that goes for about 3 hours. And it's pretty loud. So it's almost like that kind of rave. You're really into the music. Music has activation. It sort of has an epic section, like all the soundtracks for movies, and then that kind of coming home section. And the instructions are move a lot of air. Well, for a lot of people, that's very difficult. That's not the typical breath work that they're used to, which is a particular prescribed way. Inhale for 4, hold for 1, exhale for 6. But in this holotropic breathwork experience, we're really trying to tap into maybe some of the challenging things, that way to revisit, have a different perspective. Maybe there are things get stuck in our body, traumas get stuck in our bodies, a pain in our body. And so this idea of we're just using the breath, we're sort of triggering that natural DMT. And it might be that you take 3 long deep breaths, and there have been people who have taken 3 long deep breaths, basically just relaxed and had a whole entire journey just with the music. So I think that's the other thing. People are worried, like, oh my gosh, breath work for 3 hours. Like, what could I, how would I possibly do that? Like that would just be way too intense. And so that's the one different about when we talk about transpersonal breath work or holotropic breath work. It's so different. And I really look at those experiences. Those are the things that you're not going to do those daily. You typically do it in a group process. In the format that we do, the retreats that we do, and the workshops, it's where you're paired up with somebody. So you've got a breather and a person who's sitting, and that person who's sitting is there if you need a tissue, if you need to go to the bathroom. It's really kind of holding space for you, and really quite um, it's really quite amazing what those experiences are like. I would love to hear. I know you've had quite a few of those experiences over the last couple of years at some of our retreats. And you're at the beginning, you were like, "What,
Yeah.
Alice?"
The beginning, I was like, I don't know, this doesn't feel safe. What I know about breath work, this doesn't match. But I was like, I'm open to exploring. So let's try this. And it felt like a very safe container for me to try that. And that I think is really important and essential. Like, the container that we set up so that, it is, you know, people feel more comfortable, hopefully, in exploring it, right, and going to those places. And so yeah, I mean, I've had a multitude of experiences. I was thinking of, I don't want to tell any of the necessarily individual stories, but the one thread that keeps coming back from all of the experiences, because I mean, I've had anything from like falling asleep and taking a nice 3-hour nap. I obviously needed that time, to, a total visual journey of going through the jungle and different things. And it's been all over the spectrum. Um, Always an interesting experience. Even when I just fall asleep, I'm like, there's a different level of calm and depth of relaxation that comes from that. But I think the one thing has always been a takeaway from every breathe that I have thus far is a remembrance of my strength and
Mhm.
capacity.
Yeah.
That, for example, after my mother passed away and my first breath work journey a few months later, I was very worried about that. I was just like, what's going to happen? Am I going to just totally freak out? Because I, have been just wanting to freak out and containing it for months now. And I was reminded of just like, you're very strong and you're getting through this and you can do this. And it was just that kind of continued, whether it was message or feeling of just like, you're stronger than you think you are and you give yourself credit for. Um, and that I continually tap into, which is really nice. And it's nice, as you said, this isn't a daily practice, these longer
Right.
holotropic experiences, because there's so many different elements and curated things that go into that process. But each time I do it, it's just this. It's why I like to go on retreat too. It's just the big plug-in of like, oh, I'm filling my tank to overflowing. And now I can go back to my day to day, with taking those with me, has been a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, and that group process, I mean, that's a term that we're not so familiar with, but what it means is that you're going into a scenario with a group of people. And again, you're getting paired up with your partner. You get to spend a little bit of time talking with them. I'm not a person who is good at crying at home alone. There are people who will only cry at home alone, but for me, it always feels like I can release whatever is sort of stuck in there when I've got some people around, because it
Mm,
just doesn't feel so alone and it doesn't feel so scary. And so that is another part of the experience is my teachers, Bob, Lenny, and Elizabeth, from Dream Shadow, they talk about like having a cathartic experience. In our cultures long ago, people used to, and I don't know, maybe it was called preening. There's a particular word for it, of mourning, where people would wail and scream and cry, and that was very normal. I think it
mhm.
was before we started determining that women who were too emotional were hysterical, but that was a part of the culture to release those emotions, those intense emotions, especially grief.
Yeah.
And so, where in our culture today, I mean, maybe you have a therapist and you can do that, but where can you actually go and sort of feel those feel those feelings and have that really good cry and be supported, by a particular group? And by supported, I don't mean that they're rubbing your shoulder, making you feel like, oh, it's okay, it's okay. It's just having somebody hold the space,
Mhm.
meaning they're just sitting there with you. And when you reach for a tissue, they hand you a tissue.
That was the most powerful thing, actually. My first holotropic breathe, I was so worried, like, where's my sitter in space? What if I need something? Are they going to? And because I'm just so used to like doing it myself. And I'm just like, I know where everything is. I can grab it. And like as soon as I moved, Bach was my partner. There was like immediately everything I needed was just right there. And she just knew what I needed. And I wept because of that, because I was like, oh, I can just let myself be taken care of right now. Like I was the opposite of just like, I cry alone. I don't cry around people, or I don't let people take care of me. And I just like melted because I was like, she sees me and she's taking care of me. And even that just subtle thing is like, was a huge takeaway to apply in life. It's like all these little moments that you don't think are add up to anything can be quite revelation, right? Quite a revelation, the words
Yes.
I'm trying to say.
It just, we'll have to put in the link, the video from one of the retreats that we did. And it was one of the things that last year when we did all these different retreats, we were partnering up with Psychedelics Today. And the thing that was so amazing was people would come to these breathwork retreats and it'd be basically a group of strangers. People might have kind of seen each other on Zoom. And within the 5 days, people finding a safe community, people able to sort of, there might be things that you want to go back and revisit. And, because of COVID, we got more separated. Yeah, we were connected through Zoom, but that like when we're all going to be together in a space, we want to make sure as the people who are facilitating and designing that experience that there's lots of room for people to realize how interconnected we are
Yeah.
and to recognize that like we have this culture of everybody going alone, everybody doing it yourself, this individual culture. And as we start to recognize the reality that we are interdependent, we are interconnected, and in showing that vulnerability, because what was so just miraculous was, one day you're the sitter and you're holding space for your person, your journey, or your breather. And the next day, you end up trading spaces. So you might have just felt so vulnerable, so taken care of, but now you get to have the reciprocity of holding that space for the other person. And life is like that. Sometimes people are holding space for us, and sometimes we're holding space for other people, but we play both of those roles. We're never just in one role. So in that little encapsulated experience of those retreats, and people reflected that they'd never been in a community of people that they felt so connected with, and those people have stayed connected. I mean, we've had these WhatsApp groups, and it's been amazing to see how people have stayed connected with each other. When they're having a bad day, they reach out and say, "Hey, everybody, you guys are my, you were my people that I experienced those things with, and you understand kind of some of the things that I went through." What kind of experiences do we have coming ahead for this year that people might want to start to think about and look at their calendars around?
Oh yes, exciting things, because that's really what we wanted to start doing, was bringing these opportunities more into the public offering realm of what we do, because a lot of the work we do is behind corporate doors and for different organizations, but we said no, like we want also to be able to really connect and gather people together um, to just build relationships and experience that interconnectedness. So we have coming up in December at Pendle Hill, which is just outside of Philadelphia, a weekend retreat called Exploring the Breath, or Coming to the Breath. I forget what the words we exactly, when you see the website, you'll see the actual name. And so that will be a Friday through a Sunday experience. You'll get that whole experience Alice talked about, breathing and sitting, lots of different other community building and connecting, and also solo exploration and reflection opportunities. So that'll be then. And then we have something, do you want to talk a little bit about? We might have some spots of something in the summertime.
Yeah,
That's
there's
still,
there's some retreats that again we're partnering with Psychedelics Today, and they're all breathwork retreats. We're going to be going back to Costa Rica So if that's something you're interested in, please definitely let us know. There might be a couple of spots on that trip. That's going to be a week-long trip, and it's back to Blue Osa, which is just one of our favorite spots. Um, Thinking back that like 2015 was when I did my first, very, very first breathwork experience, even before. So it's been a lot of years, and really, this is kind of my passion of bringing these experiences to people. Um, and then we've got an opportunity in Portugal that's going to be sometime in October. And then we've also got a summer retreat. It's a new place that we're going to. It's called River Mountain. And it's going to be a bit of a bigger group in Pennsylvania, about 3 hours outside of Philadelphia. So those registrations are going to be coming online within the next 2 months. The December retreat is open at this time. If you're ready to register on that, next couple of days we'll have that one up. So we're really excited. It just so amazing. We've got just an amazing team of people, folks who I've been training with for many, many years. And we're going to have some CrossFit. We're going to have some yoga. We're going to have, in Costa Rica, we did a little bit of impromptu dance that was just really awesome.
Intuitive movement, I'll call it, in case anyone gets scared of the word dance.
Yes,
it's
intuitive
like
movement.
Choreographed dance. It's just move in a way that feels good to you. And that's another way to build connections within community, right? Build collective joy. It's also a way to process, right? To use our body to process some of the things that might come up in the breathwork experience. Movement is a beautiful way to work through that as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, the biggest thing is just how do we create community? How do we create these experiences for people who, what are the chances that they would ever meet? And actually, some of my closest friends are the people that I have met through my breathwork training and breathwork workshops. So if you feel like you're like, where are my people? And I'm growing and changing, and oftentimes we outgrow relationships and you're looking for, who are those new things, that's the kind of space that we're creating for people to really find those new folks and connect in their lives.
Or if you're seeking that elusive zest.
That elusive zest, that energy. I mean, there's nothing like being in Costa Rica for a week. You just come back and you're like, whoa, I feel like I got my whole entire body, mind dry cleaned on the beach or something. It's just so amazing. So
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I did put in the chat the link to the Glow with Kia Miller classes that Alice had mentioned earlier in our session. So feel free to click through in that and find Kia. She is a lovely teacher. I've actually met her in person a couple times and been on retreat with her. And she walks the walk, walks the talk, whatever. She's a brilliant teacher and just fantastic. So thanks for joining us today. We will just keep an eye on our newsletter and our social media and everything, and we'll continue to develop and open up these different opportunities for you to tune into your breath and see how breath work might support your whole being.
yeah,
Thanks.
and I'd love to know people's questions. I mean, it still feels like it's pretty mysterious. We haven't had a whole lot
Yeah.
of information about it. So still this idea of breath work. So please send us your questions. I know we'll be talking a lot more about this in the future. And thank you so much, Meg.
Thank you. Thank you all. Until we meet
Thanks,
again, please
everybody.
be well.